April 1999, and Yahoo was about to spend $5.7 billion in stock on broadcast.com, a company that mostly helped people hear radio and watch clunky online streams on the early internet. Overnight, Mark Cuban goes from rich entrepreneur to billionaire icon. But the number felt wild even then, so the question starts right there. Did he build a great company? Or did he read a crazy market better than everyone else in the room? Because that one deal didn't just change his life. It became a test for how we judge genius, luck, and hype. To see it clearly, we have to go back, way before Yahoo panicked. Mark Cuban grew up in the Pittsburgh area, in Mount Lebanon, in a family that worked for what it had. His father, Norton, did automobile upholstery. His mother, Shirley, bounced between different jobs and ideas. There wasn't some polished founder playbook in that house. No venture capital, no startup mythology. Just work, bills, and the understanding that if you wanted more, you probably had to go find it yourself. He started young, really young. At 12, he sold garbage bags door to door so he could buy a pair of sneakers. Years later, he'd explained the lesson in simple terms. Everybody needs garbage bags. That stuck with him. Selling wasn't tricking people. It was finding something people already needed and getting it to them. That sounds obvious now. Back then, for a kid, it was a move that would later prove huge. He kept going. Stamps, coins, baseball cards. Then, at 16, during the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette strike, he ran newspapers in from Cleveland to Pittsburgh and sold those too. Few people realize that detail matters because it tells you what kind of brain he had early on. He wasn't dreaming in abstractions. He was scanning for broken systems, little gaps, and quick ways to turn them into cash. School didn't slow that down. He skipped his senior year of high school and enrolled at the University of Pittsburgh. Then he transferred to Indiana University because the tuition was cheaper than other top business schools. That choice says a lot. Even then, he wasn't chasing status first. He was doing the math. At Indiana, he didn't settle into some neat student life. He kept hustling. He taught disco lessons. He ran a chain letter. He got involved in a bar business. Some of it was messy. Some of it was bold. Some of it probably looked a little ridiculous from the outside. But the pattern was already there. Mark Cuban kept testing one question over and over. What would happen if you could sell faster, bigger, and to more people than the next guy? That's the version of him that matters before the billions. Not the NBA owner. Not the TV shark. Not the guy in a t-shirt arguing with refs. The younger Cuban was basically a salesman with radar. He could spot attention, demand, and weakness in a market before most people even realized there was a market at all. And here's the interesting thing. Nothing in those early years proves he was a tech genius. It proves something else. He knew how to hustle, how to talk, and how to move before other people got comfortable. Looking back, this was the real turning point. The skill that would make him rich wasn't building from scratch in a lab. It was selling into motion and then getting out at the right time. Dallas would give him the first real shot to do that. In 1982, Cuban moved to Dallas with almost nothing figured out. He landed in a 3-bedroom apartment with 5 other guys and slept on the floor because there wasn't space for anything better. It sounds rough now, but for him, it was a trade he accepted fast. Dallas had heat, energy, and a feeling that things were opening up. He bartended at night just to stay alive, and like a lot of people in their early 20s, he was mostly trying to keep the month from collapsing on him. Then he found something that fit. He got a job at Your Business Software, one of the earliest PC software stores in Dallas. Personal computers were still new enough that most people had no idea what they were buying, which meant a good salesperson could matter a lot. Cuban didn't just sell boxes. He learned the products, learned how they worked, learned what businesses actually needed them to do. And because he could explain tech without sounding like a manual, customers trusted him. That trust mattered, because the job didn't last. Less than a year later, he got fired. The reason has become part of the legend. He went to meet a client and close a sale instead of opening the store. From his point of view, he was doing the part that brought money in. From his boss's point of view, he'd ignored a direct responsibility. Both things can be true. Still, imagine being in his shoes. You're broke, sleeping on the floor, trying to build some kind of future, and then you lose the job because you were out chasing business. But then, that humiliation turned into direction. Cuban didn't wait around for another boss. He started MicroSolutions, and he started it with almost no cushion. What kept it alive in the beginning wasn't some giant investor or a famous mentor. It was customers from his old job who believed in him enough to follow him. One early customer fronted him money for software they needed. That advance gave him room to move, and he moved hard. MicroSolutions worked as a systems integrator and software reseller. That sounds dry, but in the 1980s, it was a real opening. Businesses were buying computers and networks before most of them understood how to use them well. They needed help choosing software, linking machines together, training staff, and fixing things when they broke. Cuban stepped into that gap. He sold software, built custom solutions, and helped companies actually use this new tech instead of just paying for it and hoping. He wasn't inventing the computer age. He was helping businesses survive it. That's a different skill, and a profitable one. The company grew fast through the decade. One of its largest clients was Perot Systems. By the time he sold it in 199 to CompuServe, then a subsidiary of H&R Block, MicroSolutions had grown to more than $30 million in revenue. The sale price was $6 million, and Cuban later said he cleared about $2 million after taxes. That was the first time money stopped being theoretical. He could retire if he wanted, so he did. Sort of. He bought a lifetime pass on American Airlines because, to him, time mattered more than flashy stuff. He wanted to travel. He wanted freedom. For a minute, it looked like he'd already won. But the deal that changed his life for real didn't begin in an office or a boardroom. It started with something smaller, and honestly, kind of weird. Two Indiana fans in Dallas trying to hear a basketball game they couldn't get on local radio. By the mid-1990s, Cuban had money, time, and no urgent reason to jump back into another grind. Then, Todd Wagner, a friend from Indiana, pulled him into a problem that sounded tiny. They were in Dallas. They wanted Indiana basketball, and unless the game happened to be available where they lived, they were out of luck. That irritation became the opening. Cuban had the technical background to mess with it. He'd taught himself plenty during the MicroSolutions years, so instead of treating the internet like a novelty, he treated it like a tool. He bought a Packard Bell computer, put it in a spare bedroom, hooked up a radio, and started testing ways to move audio online. It wasn't sleek, it wasn't polished, it was improvised, fragile, and early. Which matters because a lot of the myth came later, after the money made everything sound cleaner than it was. The first version launched with a single server and an ISDN line. That alone tells you how limited the setup was. This wasn't some giant media machine. It was a workaround built by people who wanted access to something they couldn't get. In the beginning, the point wasn't to change global media. It was to hear a game. Still, a useful workaround can turn into a business fast when enough people share the same frustration. Local radio streams led to sports. Sports led to more stations. More stations led to a bigger pitch. What if the internet could become a delivery system for audio and eventually video from everywhere? That idea sounds normal now because streaming swallowed the world. Back then it sounded ahead of its time and also half broken. There's another wrinkle people leave out when they tell the legend. Chris Jabe has also been identified as the founder of Audionet, and he retained 10% of the company. So the clean version, where Cuban and Wagner simply invent the thing from a spare room and race to billions, isn't the full story. The company's beginnings were messier, with more than one person tied to the original concept. That doesn't erase Cuban's role. It just means the origin story got polished after the exit. And that polishing matters because Audionet, even as it grew, still wasn't magic software. It was using existing connections, encoding, and distribution tools in a new commercial moment. Cuban's edge wasn't that he built some impossible technology nobody else could understand. His edge was seeing how to package it, sell it, and push it harder than most people around him. In 1998, Audionet became Broadcast.com. The name change tells you where the ambition was heading. Audio alone wasn't enough anymore. The company wanted to be seen as the future of internet media, bigger than radio, bigger than one fandom problem, bigger than a bedroom with wires running across the floor. That shift helped Wall Street understand the dream, even if the product itself still depended on slow connections, glitchy streams, and a public that was only beginning to imagine life online. That's where the story starts to bend. Broadcast.com was growing, yes, but outside the company, something even more powerful was happening. Investors had stopped valuing internet businesses like normal businesses. And once that fever hit, a company didn't need to look finished. It just needed to sound like the future. By the late 1990s, the internet had stopped being a tool and turned into a story investors wanted to believe. Companies with weak revenue, shaky products, and vague promises were getting priced like they already owned tomorrow. Broadcast.com walked straight into that moment, and Mark Cuban knew how to talk to it. He wasn't pitching a little streaming company anymore. He was pitching where media was going next. Inside the company, there was real growth. Broadcast.com expanded fast, eventually reaching hundreds of employees. In the second quarter of 1999, it reported $13.5 million in revenue. That wasn't fake. The business had customers. It carried radio stations, television stations, sports, earnings calls, product launches, and live events. If a company wanted to put something online before most people knew how, Broadcast.com wanted to be the answer. But the market wasn't rewarding companies for being solid. It was rewarding them for sounding inevitable. That's a very different thing. Broadcast.com didn't need to prove it had built a machine that printed profit. It needed to convince Wall Street that one day every sound, every game, every event, every feed would run through the internet, and that if you missed this now, you'd regret it later. That pitch landed because it wasn't totally crazy. Parts of it were true. The internet really was changing distribution. Streaming really would matter. The problem was timing, cost, and quality. In those years, connections were slow, streams froze, and the experience could feel rough. So the business sat in a strange place. It was early enough to look visionary, but unfinished enough that people could project anything they wanted onto it. One of the attention spikes came from the Victoria's Secret webcast in 1999. It pulled massive interest and turned into a cultural moment for early web media. For Broadcast.com, it worked like proof, or at least the kind of proof investors wanted. If a huge live event could attract that much curiosity online, then maybe this company really was sitting on a gold mine. Maybe this awkward, buffering, stop-start version of streaming was the first draft of a giant new business. Then came the IPO. Broadcast.com went public in July 1998 at $18 a share. The first trade exploded upward and the stock closed at $62.75. That jump turned the company into one more symbol of dot-com insanity. But it also changed how people saw Cuban. He wasn't just a founder anymore. He looked like one of the new kings of the internet, a guy who had touched the future before everyone else. And to his credit, Cuban has never really hidden from the role luck played. He's admitted it directly, saying luck matters, that timing matters, that you can be smart and still need the market to meet you halfway. That honesty is part of what makes this story slippery. He doesn't claim he built every piece alone by pure genius. He talks like someone who knew he had found the right company, with the right story, in the right market, at the right second. Still, public myth moves faster than nuance. Once people see the stock chart, the coverage, the swagger, they stop asking careful questions. They start building a character. Cuban became the loud, fearless tech winner who seemed impossible to touch. The guy in a t-shirt selling the future while everyone else scrambled to catch up. And here's where it gets more serious. The IPO wasn't the end of the dream. It was the advertisement for something bigger. Broadcast.com had become expensive, but not untouchable. For the next leap, it needed one giant buyer to feel threatened enough or excited enough to pay a number that barely made sense. That buyer was already looking over its shoulder, and soon the fear of being left behind would do more for Mark Cuban than the company's actual product ever could. Yahoo didn't buy Broadcast.com because the numbers were calm and persuasive. Yahoo bought it because the internet race had turned emotional, and companies at the top were terrified of missing the next wave. Cuban and Todd Wagner understood that fear. They pushed Broadcast.com as something Yahoo could either own or spend years trying to catch. That framing mattered. In a bubble, nobody wants to be the executive who passed on the future. So in April 1999, Yahoo agreed to acquire Broadcast.com for $5.7 billion in Yahoo stock. Think about the size of that leap. This was not a normal sale built on sober math. It was one of those deals where the price tells you more about the market than the business itself. The company had real revenue, real customers, real momentum, sure, but the numbers still looked detached from the ground. That's why people still come back to this deal with disbelief. What exactly was Yahoo buying? On paper, it was buying a fast-growing internet broadcasting company. In practice, it was buying a promise. The promise that audio and video online would explode. The promise that users would gather around streamed events. The promise that Yahoo could become a giant media gateway before somebody else locked up that position first. And here's where the fraud question gets uncomfortable, because there's no evidence Broadcast.com was fake. It wasn't some empty shell with no product. But the sale price came from a market that had stopped caring about the distance between promise and reality. Cuban didn't create that madness. He sold into it. That's the difference. He didn't have to lie if buyers were already desperate to believe. Inside the company, the mood was closer to a lottery than a normal corporate milestone. Employees suddenly sat inside one of the biggest internet deals in history. Founders and early holders saw paper wealth turn into something almost unreal. It felt like the party had no ceiling. Few people realize that inside moments like this, almost nobody pauses to ask whether the buyer is overpaying. If your stock just got turned into a mountain of Yahoo shares, you celebrate first and ask questions later. Outside that room, plenty of people were already squinting at the deal. The ratio looked absurd. Tiny revenue against a giant price. An early streaming business being valued like a media empire that had already won. Even during the boom, that gap was hard to ignore. Looking back, it would become one of the easiest examples of how broken .com pricing had become. And Yahoo never really made the purchase work. Broadcast.com is now widely remembered as one of the worst internet acquisitions ever. The service didn't become the foundation of long-term Yahoo dominance. It didn't lock up the future. Within a few years, Yahoo's broadcasting services tied to the deal were discontinued. That part matters because it changes how people tell the story. If Yahoo had turned the acquisition into a monster success, Cuban might be remembered mostly as a visionary founder. Because Yahoo didn't, another interpretation took over. Maybe he sold them a dream at the exact second they were most vulnerable. Still, the cleanest version isn't that he tricked fools with a worthless toy. That misses what made the deal possible. Broadcast.com did sit near real trends. Streaming would become huge. Live internet distribution would matter. Online video would reshape media. Cuban wasn't wrong about the direction. He was early, and he was selling to a buyer that priced early like it already meant won. That leaves the central mystery sitting right in the middle of the sale. Was this brilliance? Hype? Timing? Maybe all three. He had built something real enough to matter, but rough enough that the future had to do a lot of the work. Yahoo didn't just buy a business. Yahoo bought fear, ambition, and a version of tomorrow it thought it couldn't afford to miss. A lot of people got rich during that period on paper. That part wasn't rare. The rare part was keeping it. Because when a fortune arrives in stock during a bubble, the sale isn't really over. Not yet. The next move decides whether you became wealthy or just briefly looked wealthy before the market changed its mind. This is where Cuban stopped being just a great seller and started looking like something colder, sharper, and honestly smarter than almost anyone around him. The Yahoo deal paid in stock, which meant his billions weren't really billions yet. They were tied to a market that felt invincible right until it didn't. Cuban understood that faster than a lot of people in that era. He looked at the shares and saw danger. If the dot-com run cracked, the fortune could shrink with it, so he moved to protect it. He used hedging to lock in much of the value of the Yahoo stock he had received. In his own telling, that move saved him. Without it, he's admitted, he could have lost most of the fortune. That part gets missed because it's less flashy than the sale. Nobody throws headlines at a hedge the way they do at a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. But the question isn't what he sold. The question isn't even whether Yahoo overpaid. The question is what he did once the money landed in his hands. And that answer matters almost as much. A lot of dot-com winners stayed rich on paper and then watched the paper burn. They believed the boom would keep going, or maybe they just froze. Cuban didn't freeze. He treated the market like it could turn on him, because it could, and soon it did. That decision changed everything. When the crash tore through internet wealth, he wasn't trapped in the wreckage. He came out with real power, real cash, and room to buy things that existed off a screen. That's when the story shifted again, because now he could stop looking like an internet founder and start looking like an owner the whole country could see. On January 4th, 2000, Mark Cuban bought a majority stake in the Dallas Mavericks for $285 million. That purchase did two things at once. It gave him a real-world asset after the dot-com chaos, and it gave the public a new way to watch him. Broadcast.com was abstract for most people. A basketball team wasn't. You could see the wins. You could see the losses. You could see the owner jumping out of his seat, and the Mavericks needed help. Before Cuban took over, the team had spent years looking stuck. Bad records, weak attendance, and a culture that felt tired. He came in and acted like the whole thing had to wake up fast. Not slowly, not politely, fast. He didn't behave like the old-style sports owner either. He sat near the fans instead of hiding in a suite. He wore team gear. He blasted refs in public and paid the fines. He put his email address on the Jumbotron and actually answered people. That sounds small, but think about it. Most billionaire owners try to look distant. Cuban did the opposite. He made himself impossible to miss. That wasn't just personality. It was strategy. He understood attention. He understood theater. And he understood that if people felt like the owner cared as much as they did, they'd connect to the team in a different way. So the Mark Cuban character got built in public, one loud night at a time. Behind the scenes, he spent aggressively on things a lot of owners had ignored. Better hotels, better travel, better treatment for players, better facilities. He wanted the franchise to feel first class because he thought players would respond to that. In time, a lot of the league copied that logic. But when he did it, it stood out. The basketball side improved quickly. The Mavericks became relevant again. The playoffs came back. The team value climbed. Cuban didn't just own a franchise now. He had turned himself into one of the most visible owners in American sports. For plenty of fans, this was the first version of Mark Cuban they really knew. Not the software reseller. Not the guy from the streaming deal. The owner who yelled, celebrated, argued, and looked like he was having the time of his life. But being visible cuts both ways. In 2006, the Mavericks reached the NBA Finals and lost to the Miami Heat after leading the series 2-0. The loss hit hard. Reports from that period describe Cuban taking it badly, and Dirk Nowitzki even said publicly that Cuban needed to control himself better around officials. That mattered, because it showed the limits of the character he'd built. The energy that made him magnetic could also turn messy. Then came 2011. The Mavericks won the championship, and that ring changed the feel of the whole story. Once that happened, the public myth locked in harder than ever. Loud, fearless, self-made, and always somehow ending up on top. You can see how clean that myth sounds. Too clean. The myth skips the argument people still have about him. How much of this was business genius? How much was timing? How much came from understanding real value? And how much came from understanding what people would overpay for? Whether that was a stock, a story, or a belief. The team made him more popular. It also helped cover the older question that never fully went away. So was Mark Cuban the luckiest fraud in business history? Not really, if fraud means he sold something fake. Broadcast.com wasn't fake. It helped push early streaming into the market, and parts of its vision were right. But if the question is whether he sold Wall Street a future at a price that made no sense, that's much harder to dismiss. What he seems to have understood better than most is that markets don't pay the same way all the time. Sometimes they pay for earnings. Sometimes they pay for assets. And sometimes they pay for a story they're desperate to believe. In that moment, Yahoo paid for the story. That's why Cuban is hard to place in one clean box. He was a builder. He was a hustler. He was early. He was lucky. And he was smart enough to know that the sale wasn't the finish line. The hedge may have been the most important move of all, because it turned a bubble-era jackpot into lasting power. Maybe that's the real answer. He didn't invent Wall Street's madness. He saw it clearly, let it make him rich, and got out before the lights came on. If you want more business stories where the legend sounds simple but the money trail says otherwise, subscribe and watch the next one.